Well, we could get started here. So if you read my announcement, you know that the short story project has been pushed back. Nevertheless, we're still going to be working on it all this week, starting with today, really focusing on it. So I want to go into my rationale for pushing it back. So initially, short story was going to be your second test grade for marking period 3. Now it's going to be the first test grade of marking period 4. So I was kind of torn about it. The reason I decided to push it back was because we've had everything has been cramped this marking period. We've had several weeks of just big assignment after big assignment, and some people are behind. And I didn't want to overload you guys with papers when there are people who are struggling to get in the last couple of assignments. I don't want to throw another one on top of that to just make things worse. So this way you can use this week to, if you're on ahead of things, you could get ahead of this paper. But otherwise you can use it as a catch-up week to make sure everything's in by the end of the marking period. So hopefully that'll help you make sure that you're doing as strongly as possible grade-wise for the third marking period. So that being said, it's all the more important that you get in your book club essay, because now that's your only test grade of the marking period. So there are some of you who have not turned in your book club essay. Okay? It is vital that you get that in. Okay? So really this week, I would almost rather you ignore what I'm saying about the short story. You could catch up with that later, and then use class time to finish writing the book club essay, because that's going to count as 50% of your marking period 3 grade now. So make sure you do a good job of that. Even if it's not up to your standards, just get something in, because that's better than a 0. And I'm more than happy to help you out with the draft, give you feedback, or clarify anything I can to make sure that you are able to finish that successfully. Okay, so please do keep that in mind. And for any assignment, whether it's the book club essay, the podcast, character motive paragraph, or the Dubliners quiz, all those assignments are due at the end of the week. The 19th is the last day of marking period 3. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, so today we're going to start brainstorming and revisiting the requirements of the Phoenix Fillers short story. My hope is some of you at least have a concept fleshed out. If you don't, I'm going to give you time today to brainstorm, and we'll look at a couple of examples of successful short stories. Okay. So if you've already blocked it out of your memory, here were the requirements for the short story. It is a short story of at least 3 pages that takes place in Phoenixville, is our take on Dubliners. So the new due date for these is March 24th. I chose that day because that's the day that many of you are going to be taking the PSATs. So I think probably you'll come back to class mentally fried. And so whether you're here or whether you're taking the PSATs or not, that day will just be like a final proofreading and editing day for the short story. So it's due then. I do still have an assignment due at the end of the week, though. Just a 1-page draft of your story will be due. You're more than welcome to write more than that. Probably be very easy and doable to write more than that. But we'll do some peer reviews then, so you can get some feedback on how you're doing. So with this assignment, I'm trying to balance 2 things. I want you to show me that you understand Joyce's style, but I also want to let you kind of like explore your own ideas, write creatively, express yourself, do something a little more personal and meaningful for you. Short stories, they're not like analytical essays. It's about your ideas. And so what I really want to encourage you to do is write the story that you want to write. Make it about you, make it about something you care about. Make this a good experience for yourself. I don't want you to just write what you think I want to hear. Okay. That being said, I do want there to be some connection to Joyce, but the degree of connection to Joyce is up to you. Okay. So the most obvious way to do this would be to write about a non-event. Okay. where nothing really happens in the story externally, and most of the interest comes from what happens inside the character's mind. Okay. We'll read an example of this from last year. But it could be a regular day of school where nothing really happens, but it ends with the character having some sort of epiphany where they see the world differently. So instead of Dublin, it's taking place in Phoenixville. You might also try to imitate Joyce's style. He has this gritty realism. He leaves a lot of the information out and leaves a lot of what happens to your imagination. He writes about childhood, religion, national identity, all those issues, so you can work those in. I mean, Joyce's purpose with Dubliners was to diagnose a problem he saw with his country, which for him was paralysis. Another way to take this might be if you see a different problem with Phoenixville or with the country. Let's say you want to write about, I don't know, partisanship or some issue like that, and write a story where you dramatize that problem. That's fine with me too. So I can be pretty flexible with this. I want you to be writing the story that's your story, but I also want to see that you can draw some connection to Joyce. Hopefully that makes sense. So what will a successful A story look like? Like I said, it'll balance Joyce's style while also having like a kind of interesting vision. The best stories will make me like sit back and say, huh, that was kind of interesting. I liked reading that, or it's had some cool parts, right? It's a story. It should make me feel something. It should also convey some important or interesting idea. It needs to have some coherent beginning, middle, and ending, right? The best way to do this would be to focus on events surrounding one person. If you're trying to make this about several different people, might be too ambitious. It's not going to work in 3 pages. And the events don't have to be big and dramatic. This is not an action story or a sci-fi story or fantasy. It should be, in the real world, something that happens in a limited time frame. But beyond that, be creative. I do want you to use good language, figurative language. Be deliberate with how you use imagery and setting, all the things we talk about that we analyze in class. Now's your chance to use those for yourself and see why authors include them. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay, then let's look at an example. So what I'd like you to do is go into Canvas and find the file that's titled Phoenixville Sample Number 1. This is a short story written last year that I liked, that kind of nicely addresses the basic requirements of the problem. There's a second sample there too, that takes some more like artistic liberties, but also a really solid story that's worth looking at. Anyway, read sample 1. As you read, I want you to think about 2 things. Number 1, where do you see examples of Joyce's writing style? Like, what are things that are done well here? And then you could also note anything that you didn't really like, didn't work for you, that you would have done differently. So basically, one thing you liked, one thing you didn't like in the story. If you finish early, you could take a look at sample number 2. Okay. So it's titled Mathletes, and this was written last year. It was around the time before quarantine, and there was an event at school that was kind of notable. You might see this and like be reminded of it. And I thought the author, she worked in this actual event pretty well. Once you see it, you'll know what I mean. But check that out. I'll give you, let's say until 12:46. We'll meet up again then and discuss what you found. So read Phoenixville Sample 1. I'll let you know when we can talk again. Go ahead. So just like another minute or so to finish up. If you finish reading this one, take a look at the second sample. Actually, I like that one a little bit better. This one's good too, though. All right, so let's go over that story and share what you noticed. Hey, do you guys remember this when that happened? When one of the elementary schools had like a gas leak and all the little kids were roaming around the halls? Yeah, that was a funny experience. They came to my room one day. I was like putting something away in the back of the room, and then all of a sudden the door opened and one of the guidance counselors was there. They were like, "Hey, do you mind if we borrow your classroom?" And I was like, Sure." And then all of a sudden this long train of like 30 third graders walked in, like all hyper, like looking around my room at the posters and everything. And it was like kind of adorable, but they invaded for a day. Anyways, so you can see she used this as that as an inspiration for this story and kind of took it and ran with it in her own way. But what did you guys notice here? What was Joycean? Anything work for you, not work for you? What do you think? Ava, start us off.
The main character, he's not named. It's just they've heard him as he all the time.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. It's a smaller detail, but it's definitely true of Joyce's first three stories. Unnamed boy narrator. So something like that is sufficient. I mean, you probably want to do more than just that, but that's a good connection to Joyce. Okay, Norman, what else did you see?
I saw the recurring theme that time was moving slowly.
Good. Yeah, time's moving slowly. I think she did a good job of creating that feeling of monotony and capturing that, which I'm sure you've all experienced. Colin, what about you?
I noticed the paralysis, like he is sitting in class and he's just so caught up that he's just like in a paralyzed kind of state, and just like time just seems to fly by. Like he's in his own world, or she, I don't know. They.
Yeah, I think in this case it's a he, but that's another good point. Yeah, you see the paralysis pretty clearly in the ending. So I'll point out just some things that I noticed here. Norm, is that your hand up from before, or did you have something else to add?
It's from before.
Okay, no worries. So I thought the story was really nicely paced. Do you remember from the character motive paragraph assignment? I prefaced that assignment with a quote from Kurt Vonnegut, which is like every character needs to want something, right? And you get that in the beginning, right? What does this boy want? He wants to pass math so he doesn't have to take it again. So you have that motivation clearly established in the beginning, and then throughout the rest of the story, you see him trying to sneak in math studying here and there, always worrying about his grade. And so all of that builds up to the day of the test, right? And he's struggling to concentrate. And you have this moment where he sits down, does the first problem, things are going well. Then he sees the little kids, and those send him off into like, here, this is kind of the epiphany section. And he starts daydreaming about his lost youth, right? He sees the kids, thinks about, oh, I used to be young like that. I like this line. And once he was just a child just like them, one day they would be high schoolers just like him, kind of recognizing how time is passing for him, how it's passing for other people. There's this realization of the transitory nature of life. That's nice. And then all of a sudden it's like, beep, class is over. Oh crap, he's just done only one problem. And he's just zoned out this whole time. And you're kind of pulled along with this. It kind of comes out of nowhere. Oh, class is over already. Like, so you're sort of surprised with him. So I liked how time was kind of compressed with this epiphany, and you're sort of just taken along with his thoughts with him, right? And then it ends. So that was nicely done. I also liked some of the language here, some of the descriptions, like the posters in the Spanish classroom. They were old and faded, gave the appearance of sun bleach despite them having never touched sunlight from where they were in the room. I thought that was a really nice way to kind of symbolize how like drained and lifeless he was feeling in the room. The one thing I didn't really, not that I didn't like it, but I think it could have been improved. I found the ending a little bit over-exaggerated. He thought he had prepared for the worst, and yet the reality was more terrible than any idea he could have created. To me, it would have been more effective if it ended with him, say, staring down at the F that he received on his test, or staring at the hallway where the children just before were walking by. This, to me, seems a little too on the nose, a little too obvious. I wouldn't have ended with something this direct. So that's the first sample. Any other thoughts about it? Okay, so that's a pretty conventional take on rewriting Joyce. There's the other sample too, that's up there. That's a short story about being unable to write a short story that I thought was well done. So I would encourage you to look at that as well. All right, so here's what we're going to do for the rest of the period. I'll just let you brainstorm and figure out what you want to do for your own story. Let me do a new share. So if you go into the Dubliners module, over here you'll see Phoenix Villar's story pitch. Click on that. This is the assignment we'll work on. I want you to pitch your story to me. That is to say, try to sell me on your story or present your story idea. This is just so you can get your ideas out and so I can see what you're thinking and let you know if it's workable or if it's gonna be difficult for you to write. And all I'm looking for is like 3 sentences explaining what your story is. So you don't have to write the story. I'm looking for, my idea for this story is a boy who needs to pass math, but he can't concentrate and ends up zoning out and thinking about childhood instead. And the epiphany is him realizing the fleeting nature of life and how he misses his youth. Like some explanation like that, your concept of the story is what I want you to submit. Okay. So you can think about this for the rest of the period. It's due tomorrow morning. And if you want to toss some ideas around with me, I can meet with you in a breakout room. But again, if you haven't done your book club essay, please work on your book club essay now instead of this. You can get to this later.